Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, a concerning trend. More Chinese and Russians attempting to breach U.S. military bases.
This is something we see probably 2 or 3 times a week, where we're stopping these folks at the gate.
A delegation of U.S. lawmakers is in Taiwan. They say U.S. weapons are on the way and that the U.S. supports Taiwan's new president. China, Japan, and South Korea restarting trade talks with the Chinese premier. They're calling it a new beginning. What it means for the U.S. as Washington sends tariffs soaring on Chinese exports. And another door could be closing for China. Italy is calling on the EU to follow Washington's new tariff hike on China in order to protect the bloc's industries. A U.S. Navy admiral says more Chinese and Russian nationals are attempting to infiltrate U.S. military bases.
This thing of our military bases getting penetrated by foreign nationals is happening more and more. You know, this is something we see probably 2 or 3 times a week, where we're stopping these folks at the gate
A week.
He added that estimate covers just the Navy, not including other military branches.
And usually the cover story is, I'm a student, I'm here, I'm an enthusiast, I want to see the ships, that type of thing. We have to turn them around. And typically we get NCIS involved with those, and we get biometrics when possible.
His remark comes after 2 Jordanian nationals tried to breach Marine Corps base Quantico in Virginia in May. One of them crossed into the U.S. illegally just a month ago. Both are in ICE custody. In April, an illegal Chinese immigrant was arrested after trying to breach a U.S. military base in California. Officials said he drove onto the military base without an ID and ignored orders to leave. Zooming out on the border crisis, over 27,000 Chinese nationals have crossed into the U.S. through the southwest border in fiscal year 2024. That's an over 6,000% spike compared to fiscal year 2021, when the Biden administration took office. Also, in recent years, more Chinese nationals have been trying to get onto U.S. military bases. Over in Washington, D.C., some Chinese nationals posing as tourists left designated tour areas of the White House to take photos of communication gear and security guard positions. As for other incidents, a group of Chinese nationals appeared to be scuba diving off a launch site for U.S. spy satellites in Florida, while Chinese gate crashers were also found stepping into a U.S. missile range in New Mexico. Last year, a car of Chinese nationals drove onto a military base in Alaska. In 2023, Chinese nationals were sentenced to around a year in prison for entering a naval base in Key West to take photos. And in 2019, a Chinese student was sentenced to a year behind bars for taking photos at the same military base. The student, Zhao Qianli, was 20 years old. His lawyer said he was a tourist that got lost. But Zhao's camera and cell phone only had photos taken at the military base stored on them. In the same year, the U.S. reportedly expelled 2 Chinese diplomats quietly. That's after the pair and their wives drove onto a military base in Virginia, home to highly sensitive facilities used for Navy SEAL training. A bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers is in Taiwan. On the schedule is a meeting with Taiwan's new president. What's more, the lawmakers arrive with a pledge of U.S. support. Congressman Michael McCall assured Taiwan that U.S. weapons are on their way. That's as Taiwan pointed to a delayed delivery.
Everyone here is an important force in friendship with Taiwan on the House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee. I hope that with your support in the future, the U.S. Congress will pass legislation to help Taiwan strengthen its self-defense capabilities and increase exchanges and cooperation between Taiwan and the United States.
And without deterrence, Chairman Xi has bold and aggressive ambitions. And we just need to do everything we can to make it possible for him to see that the risk outweighs the reward, that the risk is just too high.
The U.S. delegation recognized the urgency of Taiwan's need for the weapons after Beijing launched military drills around the island following the new president's inauguration. New President Lai Ching-te said the visit shows firm support for the new administration, as well as Taiwan's people. McCall said that the U.S. would continue to support Taiwan no matter who wins the U.S. presidential election in November. Taiwan's stock market remained relatively calm despite Chinese drills encircling the island. Its benchmark index hit a historic high. The market closed up 0.3% on Thursday, the day the drills began. It closed down 0.2% Friday. In comparison, Chinese stocks were down after the drills kicked off. Shares dipped during both days of the drills. China kicked off the drills surrounding Taiwan last week. The move aimed to test its ability to seize Taiwan. Leaders from China, Japan, and South Korea met for their first three-way talks in 4 years on Monday in Seoul. Here's a closer look.
South Korean officials said that country President Yoon Suk-yeol, Chinese Premier Li Qiang, and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will adopt a joint statement on 6 key areas, including economy and trade, science and technology, and people-to-people exchanges. The rare summit comes amid global tensions that have strained trade and security dialogues between East Asia's economic powerhouses. China and U.S. allied South Korea and Japan are trying to manage rising distrust amid the rivalry between Beijing and Washington and tensions over democratically ruled Taiwan, which China claims as its own. Yoon and Kishida have charted a closer course with each other and to Washington, embarking on unprecedented three-way cooperation with the United States on military and other measures. In bilateral talks a day earlier, Li and Kishida discussed Taiwan and agreed to hold a new round of bilateral high-level economic dialogue. Yoon and the Chinese premier agreed to a diplomatic and security dialogue and to resume free trade talks. Yoon also asked China to play a constructive role with its partners in North Korea, which is expanding its nuclear weapons and missile arsenal in defiance of the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Officials and diplomats from South Korea and Japan have set a low bar for the summit. They say it's uncertain whether there will be major announcements, but that the gathering will help the three countries reinvigorate their strained relations.
China, Japan, and South Korea are restarting trade talks with the Chinese premier, and they are calling it a new beginning. What does it mean for the U.S. as America increases tariffs on Chinese exports? Here to unpack that summit is retired Marine Corps Colonel Grant Newsham. He's also the author of When China Attacks and a research fellow at the Japan Forum.
Good to have you, Colonel. Now, what is your assessment of what came out of this recent Trilateral summit?
Oh, ultimately, nothing much. Yes, some observers will say, well, at least they're talking and that reduces friction and it calms things down. Maybe, but keep in mind that while the talks were going on, China conducted probably the most serious, complex, and threatening military exercises and activities around Taiwan. And additionally, they were probably involved in some of the political turmoil that took place in the Taiwan legislature as well. So while they're talking a good game up in Seoul, at the same time, they are doing everything they can to threaten, frighten, and bring Taiwan to heel. And South Korea and Japan know very well just how important Taiwan and at least a free and independent Taiwan is to both of their national survivals. And they're well aware of that. So a lot of talk took place at the meeting, but at the end of the day, you could see that not much came out of it other than agreement to keep talking.
So you've spoken a little bit about the significance of this meeting, but what could it mean for the U.S., if anything?
Well, what happens in Asia very much affects us directly. For one thing, we're involved there. We've got 50,000 troops in the region and are willing to send more. We've effectively guaranteed the freedom, security of South Korea and Japan, not to mention the Philippines, and we have an implicit guarantee for Taiwan. But also, if you lose your position in Asia and you're seen as unreliable, America's position in the entire world will suffer a grievous blow. Economically, of course, we have huge interests in the region, but it's more than just economics. It really is a question of national power and really the ability of the free nations to defend themselves from a threat that nobody's ever seen in the last, really in anybody's lifetime. put it that way.
All right. Retired Marine Corps Colonel Grant Newsham, thank you for your time today. And again, thank you for your service.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Some European pork could be facing a trade probe from Chinese authorities. A recent social media post by the Beijing-based Global Times newspaper hinted the possibility. It said Chinese industries are planning to ask authorities to launch an anti-dumping investigation into certain pork products imported from Europe. Chinese businesses are preparing evidence to report on the matter. Worth noting, Global Times serves as an English-language long arm of the top Chinese state newspaper. China seems to favor French pork. Earlier this month, Chinese customs announced that China and France are working together on increasing French pork imports to China. It follows the head of the Chinese Communist Party's visit to France and a call for more cooperation between Beijing and Paris. A message from Italy: European industries can be wiped out if the EU doesn't impose much higher tariffs on Chinese goods following the U.S. The comment came from Italy's Minister of Industry over the weekend. Days earlier, the Biden administration significantly raised tariffs on certain key Chinese imports, with some taking effect as early as this August. The trade tax raise targets Chinese-made electric cars the hardest, with the tariff rate now at a full 100%. The Italian minister warned that Chinese manufacturers could redirect their products toward Europe, resulting in a major problem for the bloc's domestic car makers. The U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen called to build a wall of opposition against China's unfair trade practices. That's during last week's summits with her counterparts from the Group of Seven Forum, comprised of some of the globe's wealthiest democracies. The largest fund in China aiming to boost the country's microchip makers. Beijing is putting together billions of dollars for another state-backed investment fund. That's as it pushes its semiconductor industry towards self-reliance. NTD's Sean Marshall has more.
$47.5 billion is going into China's biggest semiconductor investor fund ever. The tens of billions of dollars invested underscores the Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping's drive to achieve self-sufficiency for China in semiconductors. China's finance ministry is the biggest backer of the fund, along with major state-owned banks and organizations. Also known as Big Fund 3, this is part of the National Chip Fund, started about a decade ago, with around $13 billion invested. It has provided financing to some of China's chip foundries. Stefan Ezell, vice president of the ITF, believes China's aggressive subsidies are particularly concerning. China's policies could seriously disrupt the innovation economics of the industry by permitting Chinese competitors to subsist in the sector while earning below market rates of return because they are heavily subsidized and can so underprice their goods, depriving true innovators of the revenue needed to invest in future generations of R&D. The global chips war is intensifying. The U.S. and European Union have channeled nearly $81 billion towards manufacturing the next generation of semiconductors. The U.S. is also planning to slap tariffs on $18 billion of Chinese imports, including electric vehicles, computer chips, and medical products. The White House cited what it described as, quote, unacceptable risks to U.S. economic security. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
And before we continue, we'd like to address a segment from our program last Friday. We reported a story where a former Chinese spy spoke with NTD about the inner workings of Beijing's tactics to snatch dissidents overseas. In it, we misstated the name of exiled Chinese political cartoonist Rebel Pepper, also known as Wang Liming. We regret the error. That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 3 years. If you'd like to support us, consider donating. Find us at donorbox.org/China-in-focus or subscribe to our partner platform Epic TV, where you can watch our full episodes. Just click the link down below. Here's what to look out for in our second half. A former CIA officer pleads guilty to spying for China decades ago. Details of the Justice Department charges. Tensions between the U.S. and Communist China reached new heights after a string of trade restrictions. An expert panel focuses on Washington's current economic strategy toward Beijing.
Our objective cannot be a level playing field. We do not want equal competition between the United States and a competitor that we may one day face on the battlefield.
And a not-so-sweet deal. Fake honey from China is flooding European grocery stores. Despite tighter EU rules, the trend persists to the extent that beekeepers say their businesses are at risk. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.